everyone, welcome back. This session is called How We Treat the Most Vulnerable in Society and How We Stand in Solidarity with Them. It's a pretty standard basic that pretty much everyone's going to accept, that the question of how we treat our most vulnerable is a measure of our humanity. And I'm joined for this session by Curtis and Damo, who you've already met, so I don't think there's any introduction required there. I guess the first question for this segment would be, what do we mean by vulnerable? Who are the most vulnerable in our society? Damo.
You're going to start with me here. Actually, well, you come to me and obviously you're aware of my background and that I'm an unpaid carer, and I happen to know, having made numerous videos about disability issues on YouTube, that there's a large section of disabled people that don't like being called vulnerable because they've got as much right to live in society as anybody else. They don't deserve to be treated any differently. They have additional needs, sure. They might have a higher cost of living, and that comes as a result of taking care of their conditions, their health, whatever. But they shouldn't be inherently vulnerable. Nobody should be inherently vulnerable. They're being made vulnerable. Indeed. And you have to come back to why that is. And it's a lot of what we've been talking about already today. It's been a case of it's divide and rule. It's scapegoating. It is the government deciding, well, we need to cut money from somewhere, we're going to pick on you, therefore we're going to manufacture consent for that, and we're going to say you're scroungers, say you're work shy, and we've seen what happened since, haven't we? David Cameron and George Osborne through austerity, and it didn't end when they fell out of favour. It just carried on, and you end up with the assessments, of course, the work capability assessment. You get people trying to apply for that extra bit of money because they have a disability, so they try to apply for personal independence payment. And every single hurdle is made more and more difficult for them, and that is done deliberately. And even now they're thinking of tightening it up again because, whoops, so many people are still managing to claim it somehow. We've made it so hard for them. How have they managed this? Well, it's because there are people out there that believe in actually helping disabled people. And there's agencies out there that help people through the wasp's nest of forms and assessments that support people in able to get through that process, made as onerous as it has been. And they can't stand it, so they've got to find another reason to demonise them. And if that's not going to work on the disabled, if public opinion goes against the grain there, they think, no, they've been kicked enough, then it's going to be another demographic of some descriptions. And migrants now, for example.
I mean, I think it's quite a pejorative term, actually, this vulnerable thing. But I think it's really important that the disabled people is one group of society that's going to really struggle. What's your take on it, Curtis?
I think it's a really fascinating discussion, the way we talk about this, because it to me still feels like quite a capitalistic thing to say, the vulnerable, as if to say, we need the state to step in to take care of these people, because inherently the capitalist system serves a very slim sort of portion of the population. It's you have to be a go-getter. You've got to be energetic. You've got to be able-bodied. You've got to be mentally resilient to all these things, and it's fundamentally, to me, anti-human. So instead of I want to kind of reframe this conversation from how can the state protect the vulnerable, and look at the entire political and economic system that creates, what you said, vulnerable people in the first place. Instead of just protecting vulnerable people, everyone should be thriving. And I think the heart of the issue is the fact that the system of capitalism is fundamentally anti-human. If you look at education, I mean, we've had discussions about this, haven't we? Last night, actually. Education today has become a tool to prep you to be the cog in the machine. You need to get a well-paid job, and what's the numerical value you can contribute to society? But the arts, human thinking and imagination are all seen as something that's wasteful, not necessary. It's very neoliberal. So I think, of course, we can talk about the austerity experiment, which was a catastrophic failure, even if you want to call it a failure, because that kind of says that there was something, they tried to do something positive, which it wasn't. It was by design. But yes, we can talk about the 330,000 people that were slaughtered by the Conservatives, and the fact that the Labour Party have basically kept on austerity. But I do think that fundamentally, you can have a strong social democratic society, and yes, there are going to be better welfare programs, social programs, but it's the plaster that is on capitalism which forces people to act like robots in a economic system that doesn't serve human need. And I think that actually that extends beyond people with physical disabilities. I think that there's a mental health crisis in our society. Again, could be down to public cuts to mental health provision. But also, I think that the system of capitalism, no one's happy. I mean, look at where we're going now. Look at the great and beautiful things capitalism is creating, like AI and the way AI has been weaponized. I mean, we spoke about this. There's a new website called friend.com. And the idea is an AI system that replaces friendship, not real human connectivity, but speaking to an AI algorithm in which they can use that data to sell it on. So I think that fundamentally capitalism is what creates a society where we then sort of, because I think it's almost a liberal thing, not a left-wing thing, but a liberal thing to say, we must take care of the vulnerable in society. Well, Damien, you're absolutely right. The system of capitalism creates that in the first place. So we need to completely dismantle this political and economic system. And then on top of that, you do have that performative cruelty of austerity.
Yeah.
That, okay, we're not under a post-capitalist society. Can we at least make people's lives a little bit better? And we haven't. I think it all starts with Margaret Thatcher with individualism. You know, we cannot care about other people. We must be caring about ourselves or our own family, and that is it. Don't worry about that. I'm all right, Jack. So we've got a system of capitalism which I think is fundamentally anti-human, whilst a political project of austerity, of individualism, which has been adopted by both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And by the way, when people think reform or change, reform aren't going to change that either.
I mean, I think it's really good that you raised Margaret Thatcher, because she obviously said there's no such thing as society. And we've had decades of austerity. It's been a political choice. It's not been a necessity. We've just had a discussion on economics, but we've had the political choice of austerity. And of course, that's led to worsening conditions for the majority of people. Most of us, you know, we talk about the 99% versus the 1%, don't we? Most of us have struggled, but perhaps there are some parts of our society where people have struggled more than others. Recently we've seen 60 to 70% cuts in grants for access to work, which are actually allowing disabled people to access work, to do what, you know, the government say we need to do. They're taking away our means to do that. And I think there is such thing as society, and I think that the pandemic showed us in our best light. People looked out for their neighbours, went shopping, helped each other, and it was fantastic. And I was really hopeful that maybe we were going to begin to see the return of society. But we can't do it on our own. I'm not with the politicians who say, you know, we need a small state. We need to help each other, but we also need political and economic policies that are going to help each other. So where do we go next, Curtis?
Well, first of all, I think it's a really interesting point about small state, because a lot of politicians, particularly on the right, they say they love a small state, but they don't really like a small state. Whether it's in America clamping down on civil liberties and who you marry, you know, or in the UK, I'm sure we're going to bring onto it, whether it's Palestine Action and, you know, people just holding up a sign and getting arrested for it. These people aren't for small state. What they mean is we love a big bloated state, which is a surveillance capitalist society, but the means in which ordinary people can participate in society in a meaningful way, we don't want to do that. You're not worth spending money on, you know. You're not providing an instant return to the treasury, we're going to cut it. Which you would say that's ideological, but then they'll spend loads of money on arms and loads of money on the surveillance state. So they're, you know, our politicians are not shy on spending money. And I think that's a big myth as well when they say, oh, we can't afford this and that. They love spending money, but they want to spend it in ways in which they can track us, in ways in which they can come up new ways of arresting people under terrorism for free speech. They'll spend money that way, or selling arms to Israel. I appreciate the conversation's probably gone a bit left field there. But when it comes to protecting humanity and you know, looking for humanity to thrive, we don't want to spend that. The conversation is what we can do. This is what we're doing here. It's what we're doing with you know, people in our everyday lives. I think narratives have definitely shifted. I mean, people don't support austerity. I don't think that's the case. The reason why there's a rightward drift in politics is because, again, the right are offering a narrative and there is an absence of a mainstream narrative, or the left's been maligned. But people are certainly over austerity. They are not supportive of cuts. People want to see public investment. People want to see taxes on the rich. And that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, completely agree. What do you think, Damo?
Well, I think Curtis has actually hit the nail on the head. I would associate myself entirely with everything he said there. It's small state, they say, want small state. Small state for who? Small state for us. You can't have nothing. You can't have any money. We can't afford that. We can't afford to treat you because you're disabled. Can't afford to treat you because you're ill. Can't afford to help you in any meaningful way to become a prosperous member of society, even, such as death knell stage capitalism seems to be veering into right now. And you can see that with everything that Starmer's done, frankly, since he's come into power. I mean, the first 8 months he was in power, he spent the equivalent of £1 billion just handing it to Ukraine. Well, hang on a minute. That's all well and good. I'm not going to argue with the right or wrong of doing that. But when there's everything else you're saying you can't do, like you can't lift the 2-child benefit cap. And if I come back to disabled people again, because it's the part of this story that I know best, it's that cap, that brutal cap, which they could have lifted, they chose not to. All the money they spent going to war, whoever else, they chose not to take children out of poverty. The Labour Party choosing not to take children out of poverty. It's absolutely anathema against everything that party is supposed to stand for. They did it anyway. And they voted it through quite happily because Starmer surrounded himself with pliant yes men. But for disabled people particularly, with the higher cost of living that they have, that cut is even more brutal for them. So again, it comes back to this question of vulnerability. And who is being made vulnerable, and disabled people, especially those with families, are made even more vulnerable as a result. And of course, there's other demographics that you touched on as well that are treated in exactly the same way. Migrants now, they're being demonised and scapegoated. They're taking all our jobs. They're taking all our houses. Hang on, all these ones that are coming over in small boats, 4% of all migration is in a small boat. And if they come over here and claim asylum, they're not illegal. Doesn't matter who sold. No, they're illegal. They're coming over here illegally. They're illegally coming over here in a small boat. Well, they haven't got another option. That's been insured. That's made them vulnerable, therefore.
See, I mean, I completely agree with both of you, actually. And you raising the 2-child benefit cap, obviously, possibly the most vulnerable people in society are the children who depend on us. And if you happen to be the 3rd or 4th born child, you can get in the sea as far as this government seemed to be concerned. But also, I think that as a society, we also need to be demanding more support for women's refugees, because there is an awful lot of domestic abuse. As money gets tighter, as pressures go up, so does the level and rate of domestic abuse. So we need to start supporting those people, those women and those children. And we need to be making sure that nobody is going without dinner. Nobody is going without proper clothing, proper housing, very basic fundamentals of life. And the previous Labour government didn't think very much of them, recognised the importance of getting children off to the right start, the Sure Start centres. Why aren't they being brought back? They should be being brought back. They did make a material difference to children's academic ability. And you're looking at pockets around the country where there is so much deprivation. The kids that are going to school hungry are not going to be getting the best from their education. And that's poor for them, but that's poor for all of our society, because we're limiting the number of people that can make real contributions. They might be the next great actors. They might be the next great writers. They could be the next great economists, goodness knows. We need a few more of those. We need more doctors. We need more nurses, all of those things. We are a large society. And I just wonder, it shouldn't be on us as individuals to support this. We need to be demanding change, I think, from our elected representatives.
Yeah, I agree.
And we need to be putting pressure on those that hold those positions to be doing the right thing. We saw a bit of a climb down, didn't we, on the cuts to disability. Not enough of a climb down by a long stretch. But I do think that we often, because there is a government, it's very easy for people to go, well, they'll sort it out. No.
It's just making an assumption, isn't it? Because, I mean, of all the things that Keir Starmer could have implemented in his, tribute act to Tony Blair that is his government, fundamentally, when he's not trying to outperform reform, a Sure Start would have given him actually a positive bump if he was going to start restoring that. So of course he didn't do it, because he just seems to be that chronically inept that he can't see what's making him more and more unpopular. And of course, we've had recent polls just this week saying he's now the most unpopular Prime Minister in British history, even more so than Liz Truss now. And he's done it in just over a year in power. I mean, we all know that he's got all the charisma and likability of a plasterboard offcut, but to go that fast, that hard, and they're still just gormlessly letting him carry on in the Labour Party, it's just beggars belief.
I mean, I have to almost give Keir Starmer credit for how quickly he's turned people against him. He's a very unifying figure. He is, because the left, centre and right hate him. That's something which has been quite surprising, how good he is at being bad. And we're seeing figures of minus 77% in personal ratings is astonishing. Not surprising, of course, because, look, the slick politician of the 90s is gone. And he's not even particularly slick, right? No. But the man in the suit, the one that sort of isn't really honest, tries to be slick. That's gone. People do want integrity and honesty. And they're going to get their fake honesty from someone like Nigel Farage. He's a liar, but he has that veneer of honesty. Right? I say what people are thinking. You're lying, but people feel like that's honesty. You sort of saw that with Boris Johnson too. So I do think that the Labour Party are completely missing the moment, because we're in an era of populism, and they're trying to push briefcase melts and Morgan McSweeney copycats on us. And I just think it's not going to work.
I think I'm going to disagree with you for a change here, Curtis, because I think the problem isn't Keir Starmer. I think the problem is every single person that's sitting in Westminster, more or less, are allowing this to happen. They should be kicking up a real stink about this and raising merry hell, and we need to be demanding that they do that on our behalf. We did see a rebellion. We need more of them, I think. But people have had enough of this rule by diktat, haven't we? And obviously, just very briefly, because we're coming to the end of the segment, ID cards. What is going to be the role of ID cards on protecting the people that are most at risk of severe poverty? Rather than calling them vulnerable, they are most at risk of poverty, of finances, poverty of opportunities. How will the ID cards play into that? Well,
it wasn't too long ago that some supermarkets were going to offer payment to people if they were going to dob other people in shoplifting. Of course, you see more and more security guards being employed by supermarkets. It's a sort of surveillance state. Now, in terms of ID cards, I mean, for now, don't worry, it's just putting your information together. Whether the Labour Party does anything wrong, and I think they will, I mean, it's heavily linked to the Tony Blair Institute, right? There's money behind this. But this opens the door for successive governments to use that extra power to clamp down, once again, on the most vulnerable in society. And it'll be a way to keep track of people. We can cut your universal credit because we don't think you're behaving in the way that we think you should. So this is anything but liberation and freedom. This is more ways in which the government can use that power against vulnerable people, and it creates another issue where they can say we're doing something about it, right? If you continually attack migrants and vulnerable people, it doesn't particularly change society in a beneficial way, but they can signal to their media pundits in the right wing, we are strong, we are doing things about your concerns.
Stable, didn't work
we're strong and
well,
stable, which evidently they're not.
Damo, last couple of words on it.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken primarily in this segment about the government intentionally making people more and more vulnerable. So my automatic reaction to these ID cards is, in what way is that going to carry on with that? Because they've made no effort to address the vulnerability they've inherently created. Therefore, these cards are going to be used to penalise people again. In what way remains to be seen. We can hazard a guess. We can say, well, you're not going to be able to shop in certain places because you're on benefits. Therefore, what are you doing there? You can't afford anything they sell. Or, you can't possibly buy a holiday, or, maybe they'll be banned from buying alcohol or tobacco. And at what point does this become about an impact on people are already talking about, the impact on our freedoms that this is going to create.
Indeed.
But for those most vulnerable in our society, I just fear it's going to be so much worse for them again.
I mean, I think absolutely, again, agree with you both. I think that we did see some form of people power when we stood together and said we're not going to accept the poll tax. And I think it's about time. This is the issue that people need to get together and say, I'm not signing up for an ID card. They can't, enforce it on all of us if we say we're not doing it, we're not playing this game. So as with everything, in terms of standing up for other people and actually being proper, decent human people, we need to stand together. Solidarity is a much overused phrase, but it's incredibly important right now as they're seeking to divide us. We stand together and we make our demands very clear to our elected representatives and to our friends and to our colleagues and our neighbours on the street. Join a union, get active, get on the street if you need to, make your point, make your stand. Thank you very much. Coming up next, Damo. You're taking the seat. And his talk is going to be on migration. So stay tuned and watch Damo in a moment. Thank you very much.